Hey guys, glad to have you back for part 3 of the Fluval CO₂ series. Now it's been a few months since I uploaded part 1 and 2, and that's because I wanted to stock the tank and kind of get a feel for how stuff was going to go. I mean, it's my very first reef tank. I had no idea how the corals were going to interact with each other, or really much at all about corals. So I had to do a lot of research before I even got any corals, and the same for the fish. So if you watched the last video, you'll know that I actually started this tank with just the rock and using the Fritz Turbo Start. Everything that I use will be linked in the description. To cycle this tank, all I did was I used my own RO water with Instant Ocean, and then the Fritz Turbo Start, and then the live rock, and then all I added after that was one clownfish, which we've named Irwin after Steve Irwin. Now, I left Irwin in there for probably a month before I added anything else. And the next thing I added was the Royal Dottyback, which is the purple and yellow fish you see in there. And those are the only two fish I have in there at the moment. I am debating on a third fish. I don't really know just yet what I will do. Possibly another clown, but we'll see. Now, the first corals that I got were the Duncan corals, and I didn't really know much about them, so I did some research on them. And they're pretty non-aggressive corals. They don't sting, and they're relatively easy soft corals to grow. Now, right now, they're kind of irritated. I do have an emerald crab in there that I added probably about a week ago, and for whatever reason, ever since I've added him, the corals have been kind of agitated, and they've just kind of stayed in their coral body, I don't know what you call that, and they're just really irritated. But before that, they were really out and really happy. I have been feeding the corals reefroids, and since then they've really taken off. Now I also have a little piece of GSP in there on the right side, and then on the top is Anthelia. The Anthelia has absolutely taken off. It's probably the fastest growing coral I've seen in there. It's actually growing faster than the GSP. Now what you can't see is the GSP is actually growing down the back side of this rock, and I'll definitely end up having to move the Duncans, and that could also potentially be why the one on the right is more angry than the one on the left. I'm thinking maybe it can sense the Anthelia or something near it and it's really irritated. So I'm not really sure if it's the emerald crab or just that the Anthelia is growing down closer to it. So I may end up moving that one. I probably will. So something I've noticed with this tank is that it does not lose water very much at all. I add maybe 1 to 2 cups now of RO water a week. I've transitioned. I was doing weekly water changes. I figured it might help the corals grow and kind of keep things less agitated if I do monthly water changes. So right now I'm still running the stock filter with the ceramic media. I recently added the carbon because when I initially added all the corals, it just seemed like things were a little bit foggy. At that time I was still doing weekly water changes, but I decided to add it anyway just to see if it helped. I can't really tell much of a difference, so I'll probably just take it out. I do have 2 Nassarius snails in there. Obviously you can't see those because they live in the substrate. I have 1 Astrea snail. There's probably 5 or 6 tiny blue-legged hermit crabs in there, and then they have a bunch of extra shells on the back that I put in there so they don't fight or anything. And then the one thing you can't see, which is definitely my favorite by far, is the tuxedo urchin. We call him Tux. He is just the coolest thing ever. Whenever I just had the clown in there, Irwin, I let algae grow all over the rocks before I added anything else, and the next thing I added was the hermit crabs and Tux absolutely destroyed all the algae that had grown all over the rock, and he does a really awesome job of keeping the tank clean. They're so mobile. If you want to get a tuxedo urchin for your reef tank, I definitely recommend it. Be careful when you're adding them. I didn't know they can get air trapped in them if you just drop them in, so don't do that. Drop them upside down and make sure you really acclimate your invertebrates. I didn't know this either, and while I did acclimate mine in my little container, I didn't do it really for as long as I probably should have. I just feel bad about that, so in the future, and really with anything, you should just do a proper acclimation. With the corals, I use Coral RX to dip them before I add them to the tank, just to make sure there was nothing on them. I did end up having an issue with pest anemone that was growing on the Duncan corals, and so what I did with that was I super glued it with the super glue with the Sienna, whatever that you can use for reef tanks. It's a safe glue that you can use. So far, the only thing I've lost in the tank was one of the first Nassarius snails that I got. I think it was sick already when I got it because it never actually dug down or really did anything when I added it. So I think it was kind of already dead when I got that one. But the other 2 are still alive. My Astrea snail has been fine. everything has been thriving, honestly. It wasn't until I added the emerald crab about a week ago that stuff my Duncans just haven't looked quite the same. I'm kind of worried about that, so I'm probably gonna do a water change here soon just to be safe, and then if they pop out, I'll throw some reefroids on them. Now, with that being said, I do have an extra long siphon that I've been using to directly feed each coral, and yes, I've even been putting some over the GSP and the Anthilia, even though those are known to just grow however. I figured it doesn't hurt because I really want them to take off and kind of cover the rock. I'm also feeding frozen brine shrimp, I'm feeding Hikari pellets, and sea chem flakes. And then I also throw some of my freshwater algae tabs in there because the emerald crab and the Necarious snails seem to go crazy for them. People may have like conflicting views on that, but they seem to love it. And the clownfish and possibly the dotty bag being omnivores, I know at least the clown is. Even the clownfish, Erwin seems to like them. So as far as my complaints go for the tank so far, the only problem I've had is I do have a Fluval, I think it's an M50 heater in there, and it actually was getting too hot, and there's times where I check the temp and I have a laser gun laying next to it and I have a strip on there so I can keep checking the temp. I try to keep it at about 78 degrees, and I've had it get up to like 82, 83, and I think the issue is that the lid traps so much heat in there that there's only one spot for it to really get out, and it just doesn't do that great of a job. And the light has no adjustability on the brightness of it, so it's really, really bright and it puts off a lot of heat on its own. You could probably get by with getting whatever cheap, really small heater for this tank just because the light puts off a lot of heat on its own. If you want to play it safe, you can go with the Fluval, but really any small heater will probably work. The only reason I really got the Fluval was because I have read just so many reviews about different cheap heaters killing their fish, and I just didn't want to risk it, so I figure I may as well go with at least a brand name just to be safe, and it's cheap, so there's really no need in not doing it. The other issue is if you look right in the middle of the black part of the back of the tank, there is a little hole there, and I've noticed that especially when the water gets low, it doesn't pull enough water through into the first chamber, which is where the heater is, and so the flow of that water I think is another issue as to why the heat is kind of acting strange. I don't think it does a great job of filtering because of that hole, and I think it just kind of messes up the whole cycle, so I really need to plug that up, so I'll either buy that plug or have someone 3D print me one. The other thing is that I have this on a timer, and right now you can tell it's on the white light, and that's because it only has two settings, one for white, one for blue. And while I like the blue one, it's a little dark and you can't see the colors of your fish at all because it's not adjustable. So if I turn it on blue, you pretty much can't see the fish at all. It just makes them one color, and it's just not very good. Also, because I have it on a timer, when it kicks on, it stays on the white setting anyway, so I have to manually change it to blue every day if that's what I want to do. The other thing is the white light, because it is so bright, it makes algae grow really quickly. Now I have the little magnetic cleaner on there, and that's a big help. The tank, whenever I first set it up, was growing algae pretty quickly, about once a week if I didn't clean the glass, and at the time I was using the like white Mr. Clean pads that don't have any chemicals on them, and I was getting a lot of algae growth on the glass and the plastic, and that did a really good job of keeping the glass clean. But I actually haven't had too many issues with algae buildup, even with doing monthly water changes now. And I don't know if that's because the snail or tux or whatever, but I just haven't had that issue. I've tested all my water parameters, everything's good, everything's perfect. So since this, I've got my RODI unit set up in the garage. That way I can make my RODI water. And I've got 3 buckets, one that just has RODI water in it. The other 2 have pre-mixed salt in them. And I did buy a 250 gallon per hour pump to help mix that. I was gonna actually put that pump in this tank, but honestly, I feel like the flow is pretty adequate for how small the tank is. I think if you go any harder than that, I feel like it's gonna kind of mess with the fish. So far, I haven't really had any issues. Yes, the corals are in right now, but they were out. So I think the flow is pretty adequate. You can see it's making pretty good surface agitation on the top, so I'm pretty happy with it. And I'm just going to continue to use the other pump I got for mixing water, and if I see I have some kind of flow issue in the future, then I'll switch and put that pump in there. The reason that I stick with having 2 pre-mixed buckets for this of salt water and the one of RODI water is the RODI water is good for mixing your reefroids, and it's good for topping off your water if it does happen to get a little low. I definitely would recommend going with probably a little bit less rock than I put in this. I put about 8 to 10 pounds in here. I would probably go with slightly less so that you can clean the glass a little bit easier, unless you're building something that you want to stack up in the back and grow up the back glass or something. But I like to be able to clean all the way around my glass, and I think the rocks are just slightly larger than I would have liked, but it does look really good. The black Caribbean sea sand is really good for hiding all the algae growth, and whenever you gravel back it, you can definitely tell the difference. So it's not that you'll hide anything, like if you're worried about hiding stuff that you won't see. You'll still see it whenever you gravel vac it, but it just hides it better until you do gravel vac it. Now, you're probably wondering, should you buy this tank or should you look into other setups? And I will say there have been some other setups come out that probably are better deals for maybe $50 to $100 more. You get adjustability with your light, you get better filtration setup. So could I recommend this tank? Yes, I think it's a good tank. The biggest downfall is probably the filtration and the light for sure. The light is more annoying than the filtration, so if I was going to upgrade one thing, I would say Fluval should definitely improve the light on this. The filtration isn't terrible, but I'm not entirely sure why they put the hole on there for the filtration. Everyone seems to plug that up, and I can see why. The tank design itself is nice, however, it's not my favorite. There's a couple companies that have came out with some really nice cube setups that are about the same size and just have better filtration, better lighting, and the tank style itself just looks a little nicer, whereas this one has more of your classic fish tank style. I think for the most part it's pretty adequate though. Like I said, I was trying to run it stock just right off the bat to see how it actually goes, and I am definitely enjoying keeping the Reef tank. I really like it, and I actually plan on probably converting my other tanks to a Reef tank once my freshwater fish all die out, so that could be many years from now. I am definitely addicted to the reef hobby now, and it's really interesting to learn about corals and just reef fish in general. If you're wanting to get into this and you have the extra money, I would definitely say go bigger. As with any tank, going bigger is just always easier for water parameter swings and just having the ability to understock your tank and keep it really nice and clean. Anytime you can have a bigger tank and less fish, less corals, less plants, whatever the case may be, it's just much easier. Overall though, I really do love this tank. It's in our living room and it's definitely a centerpiece and a good conversation piece. I love my planted tanks. They're really pretty, but there's just something about having the saltwater reef tank that it's a lot more to manage, but it's really cool. The fish are a little more interactive. The fish seem to have a lot more personality than my freshwater fish, and just overall I'm very happy with it. So if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment down below. Everything as far as equipment and everything I've used to set up this tank is linked down in the description with affiliate links that will help me to continue doing fish stuff. And if you missed setting up this tank, I have 2 more videos in front of this one. You can find them. They look exactly like the same thumbnail as these. I try to keep it simple. So you'll see video 1 and video 2. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. I'd appreciate it. And thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one.